Have you ever walked into a bookstore or library and felt completely overwhelmed by the towering bookshelves, the displays filled with spicy books? You pick up a few books and you have no idea if they're clean and God honoring or not? Well, then this is the video for you. Today I'm going to be sharing tips and tricks on how to find clean and Christian fiction so that you can read confidently knowing that the contents in the novels that you're picking up and reading are God honoring and do not go against your convictions. This is Zoe's Bookcase, where we talk about faith theology in my bookcase. We're so happy to have you today, and let's jump right into it. First off, this is not a video bashing anybody for any kind of books that they read. If you read spicy books or explicit books, then, that's all you. But this is just for the people who want to read low spice, no spice, clean Christian fiction books. And these are some resources and tips and tricks to find those books. So if you are not one of those readers, this video is not for you, but I hope that you will stick around and try and kind of check out my future content. Secondly, let your convictions guide your reading. Something that convicts me might not convict you, and vice versa. So when you're picking up a book that I said was really good, but it had some trigger warnings or content in it that you know that you would not be able to pick up and read, please do not pick up that book and read it. Double check everything. Don't just take my word that something is clean. Don't take anyone else's word that something is clean. We're actually going to go over a few terms to look out for, but they're very broad and they mean something different to every single person who's recommending books. And so just always kind of be skeptical and always use your own convictions and your own kind of research before committing to trusting someone fully. Now I'm gonna go over a few of my personal convictions so that you guys kind of know what kind of books that I'll be discussing most about in this video. And so I am personally not convicted if intimacy is talked about, but I do not read books with explicit intimacy scenes. So here's an example of that. Francine Rivers is an adult historical romance author. Now, her books do discuss intimacy, most of them do. And I've read multiple of them, and I love her writing. They do discuss intimacy, and there are a few scenes that I would consider a little on the verge. They get a little detailed. But they all have really beautiful faith content, and they discuss intimacy in a God-honoring way without explicit content. And so that doesn't personally convict me. Now, you might pick up a book by her and be convicted by the intimacy talked about in her books. And so that's kind of an example of that conviction personally for me. And that's also just a little disclaimer. I do not believe Francine Rivers is for every Christian. She does talk about intimacy. She's an adult novelist for a reason. And I know that might be a little bit of a jaded response. And trust me, I love Francine Rivers. I've read a lot of her books. But I always advise people before they pick up her book that they do divulge in some mature themes and topics because she is an adult author. Secondly, I am not convicted by a book that discusses sin but doesn't glorify it. So what I mean by that, if there is a character in the book who is actively living in sin or doing sin, or even the main character themselves, that doesn't necessarily convict me as long as there are consequences to that sin and that sin is not being glorified. Now, if that character is living in sin and that sin is being actively rewarded or glorified, I will probably be putting that book down because I do not believe in reading something that glorifies sin. Another thing is I try to avoid cussing. I'm okay with very little, and I mean very little cussing. If we get into kind of F-bombs and kind of more of the harder cuss words, I will probably be putting that book down. And also, if there is a cuss word involving God, I will generally be DNFing that book immediately. I do not like cuss words involving God. I do not like excessive cussing or profanity, and so those are books that I avoid. But this day and age, I've picked up many books, even Christian books with cussing in them, or very light cussing or made up cussing, and I have not had a problem with that. But when it gets excessive or very explicit, I will not be reading that book any further. So those are just a few of my own personal convictions and kind of what kind of book recommendations that you should expect to find on this channel. And I just want to go over that really quickly. Now, before we jump into kind of some of the tips and tricks that I have, I know this is kind of a longer intro, but I feel like this is a necessary intro. I want to talk about some of the terms to look out for. So some of these terms you may have heard before, and some of them might be new to you, but I do want to discuss them so that it is very clear when I am using these terms throughout the rest of the video what they mean. Now, they are very broad, and they do vary from recommender to author, and so always be vigilant. Don't just trust anybody's review or anybody's word for it. And some of these terms, people, you use them, but that book might not necessarily be under the definition of that term. For instance, some people might call a book clean that has cussing in it, or some people might call a book clean that has excessive graphic violence in it, or some people might call a book clean and it has a fade to black scene, and you might disagree with that. And so we're just going to go over some terms, but I just wanted you to be aware that they do vary from different person to person. They are not absolutely, set. First term I want to talk about is clean or no spice. And now this is a book that has no intimacy mentioned or talked about at all. Or if it is, it's very brief, very passing, with very little detail. This is a book with no profanity or like made up profanity, like made up cuss words, or like maybe like one single very small cuss word throughout the entire book. So this is like a book that has like nothing, no intimacy and no profanity. This is a book that kind of contains none of that, and that's typically what you're going to see as a clean book. The next term is going to be closed door or fade to black or low spice. These are kind of three terms that you're going to see kind of grouped together, kind of thrown in there, and so these terms are just as broad as kind of clean is. But these are typically books that involve very little intimacy throughout the book. So either the intimacy happens off the screen, fades to black, like they're making out and it fades to black, or it happens completely behind a closed door and we don't see it at all or hear about it at all, but we know it happened. Or it is mentioned and talked about with no explicit detail. So these are kind of books like where Francine Rivers would kind of sit. She would be more in this category, or in slightly, there's a few scenes in some of her other books that dip slightly in the other category, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But these are typically books where the discussion of intimacy happens, but it is not explicit and not detailed. And they're books that kind of indulge into that aspect of relationships without trying to be explicit. The next term that I want to talk about is cracked door. So this is a very, very broad term. It typically describes a book where they will have scenes where we see or hear a little bit of intimacy. It's kind of filling this weird gap between a book that isn't completely spicy or low spice. So it does not contain fully explicit intimacy scenes, but sometimes these are books that want to discuss heavy sexual topics without being explicit. So, for instance, Francine Rivers' Redeeming Love book, I would consider that book cracked door, because it does contain scenes where intimacy is talked about in detail without being explicit. That book I would consider personally cracked door, and then a lot of her other books I would consider closed door, fade to black. Her books do fall in that area, and I think Francine Rivers is a beautiful example of these terms because it is a author that a lot of us know and love, and you can kind of get where the books will fall based off of hers a little bit. You can get a feeling for some other books. So cracked door is typically going to be a book you might pick up that actively discusses heavy topics without being explicit, or married, and so this one gets kind of gray area. Just always use your convictions when you're reading, and always be careful because some people might mention cracked door and it might be a fully explicit and spicy book, and some people might mention cracked door and it be fully fade to black. So this is kind of a really gray term that's kind of really hard to fully nail down what someone is recommending or saying when they are saying that this book is cracked door. So this one is kind of a tricky one. And then the next one is not tricky at all. The next one is open door or spicy, is another one that you'll see it called. So these are books that contain fully explicit intimacy scenes with graphic details, where the reader is fully present for all physical details. Those are kind of some terms that I want you guys to be familiar with while we were discussing the tips and tricks, because you're going to see these terms a lot and they can be very confusing because they don't mean the same thing to everybody else. You're probably wondering, how in the world do we find books that are God honoring, that are in my convictions, when so far all this seems very overwhelming and very confusing? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So I have found personally the best way to find clean books is to memorize a few publishing houses that only publish clean or Christian books. Now I will list a full list, and always be sure to go and check and make sure if these books are actually going to be in your convictions or not, or if you've read books from these publishers already and you know that you enjoy them. But typically, if a publishing house says that a certain topic goes against their publishing standards, they will not be publishing books that contain that topic. Now, of course, there are always outliers, and so always be aware of that. But typically, if a publishing house says that they publish clean Christian romance, they're going to be publishing clean Christian romance. If a publishing house says that they publish, spicy books, they're going to be publishing spicy books. So always go up, you can look on their website and see the exact kind of books that they want to publish, and you can check them out and everything, and I'll have a full list. But a few ones that I can just mention off the top of my head is Bethany House, Tyndale House, Reeville, and Enclave. This is the easiest way because you know that a publisher will not be going against their own standards, because they would lose sales and the trust of the readers if they were to publish a book that went against the standards that they've set. So this is a great way to find clean books. Now, authors can be a little bit more tricky, because I've personally read books by authors that I absolutely loved their book and I enjoyed it so much, and it was completely clean and free of all content. And then I picked up another book from them thinking that I'd be going into kind of the same content level, and was completely shocked at the content I found in that book. And so always be aware that some authors may publish a clean or Christian book, and then their next book might not be clean and Christian. So, use discernment on that. And also, not every Christian author publishes clean books. I've gone into a book expecting it to be clean because it was published by a Christian author, and was very shocked to find that it was not clean. And again, that just falls under different people's convictions, and that's completely okay, but just be aware of that. Good way to check out if an author is within your convictions or not is to go to their social media accounts or their author website. Typically, if they are a clean or faith-based writer, they will have that in their bios, in their websites or social media accounts. So you can kind of go and see what kind of books they write and check it out and see what kind of content are in their books. And so that's a good way to kind of check out authors. And then as you read, you'll find authors you love and trust, and authors that the minute they come out with a book, you're buying it because you've read their other books and you absolutely love them, and you know that you can trust that their books will be filled with good faith content or very clean content, and that it will not go against your convictions. Another great way to find clean books is to check tags on Goodreads. So Goodreads will have tags on books, and so if a book is typically tagged clean, wholesome, faith, Christian, all those are typically good indicators that this is probably a book that's safe to pick up. If it's tagged, spicy or explicit or all that, then probably not. Steamy, that's another one. That's probably not a good book to pick up if you are looking to avoid those kinds of books. And so tags are a great way on Goodreads to find books and through the reviews. Another way that I also like to find good books is Amazon reviews. In Amazon, sometimes Amazon will actually have content warnings in the book description on their listing. But if they don't have that, then you can go down to the reviews and you can manually search tag words like spicy, steamy, clean, faith-based, wholesome, all that. And you can read reviews from actual people to see if those books contain clean content or spicy content. Another great way to check out that is also Storygraph. If you look on a book on Storygraph, if you scroll to the very bottom, it will have a section where it says content warnings, and you can check out if it is clean or not, because if it involves any kind of explicit scenes, it will have the content warnings in there, and there's 3 levels to it: low, medium, and high. And you can go and click on them and look at the actual reviews. Now, some people just say that it has it in it and doesn't actually write a review about it, which can be kind of tricky because it is all based on personal reviewers. So some books will not have enough reviews for content warnings, and some books will have plenty of reviews for content warnings. And this is another great way to find trigger warnings, is through Storygraph and Goodreads tags, because typically they will have content warnings, trigger warnings in there too. So if you're trying to avoid certain triggers, it's a good way to check that out too. There are also websites out there that filter content warnings. I've not personally tested out any of these websites enough to personally recommend them. I've seen some people recommend romance.io, but again, I haven't personally used it. It's supposed to be a website where you can go and you can check out the content warnings on a book. And then another one is Book Trigger Warnings, which is, a place where you can typically go check out the trigger warnings. And then also Trigger Warning Database. If you guys would be interested in me testing them out and doing a full review on these websites or any other websites that you've wanted to kind of had test out. So I can't fully recommend them because I don't have any personal experience with them, but feel free to check them out and see if there's something that will work for you. In conclusion, there's really no way to know if a book is going to fully convict you or not, but if you follow these tips and tricks, these are some really good ways to find books that lie within your convictions and that are God honoring, because we really want to honor God with our faith every single day. But also, don't be afraid to try something. If a book convicts you or it has content in it that you were not expecting, you can always stop reading it. Don't be afraid to try out different books or authors or publishing houses. If a book sounds interesting to you and from your little glance through it, it looks like it doesn't have any content in it, just try it out. A good way to do this is through your local library, through Libby, an app on your phone that runs through your local library where you can get access to free ebooks and audiobooks. Thrift books, which is where you can get cheap or marked down novels, or through thrift stores and sales that you find throughout your city or in your bookstores or just throughout, your day-to-day life. These are a few great ways to test out new books without committing a lot of money into it. These are some of my favorite ways to find new publishers and authors and books that I might not be necessarily ready to commit to buying the full book or the book series, but maybe I'll try the first book at the library or through Libby, or I'll find a book that's super cheap on sale and I'll just buy it and just see if it's something that I can enjoy without having to commit a bunch of time and money into something that I might not be able to enjoy or read. So yeah, these are just a few tips and tricks. I hope that this helps you guys in your book journeys, and that if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. I would love to hear your guys' feedbacks. If you have any tips or tricks that I missed, please drop them down in the comments. If you have a website you swear by or an app you swear by, please drop it in the comments. I would love to see. I'm always looking for new ways to find clean and Christian books. And so, yeah. Don't forget to let your light shine and have a blessed day. Bye.